I decided to attend a powwow for my cultural experience as I found it a good opportunity to further my understanding of Indigenous practices in person. As I approached the arena, there were many people of all ages wearing regalia of all different kinds of colors and designs. As I was observing the males and females participating, I've noticed key differences on the outfits they were wearing. Male wore headdresses which had many feathers, while females only had one or two attached to their heads. Females wore regalia which had a dress-like appearance with ribbons and bells attached to them. When I entered the arena, it was very loud with the singing and drumming in the background. At first, I thought microphones were scattered around for louder singing, but it turns out it was them singing over the top of their lungs. I was amazed to learn about the absolute power they had with their voices as they danced around the arena in rhythm with the drums. They had to keep up with the drum's beat, so it was intense to watch them dance. What the typical individual would consider difficult was made to appear much easier by the dancers. The division between female and male dancers is what interests me. I wonder if the distinctions between the capabilities of the male and female bodies or cultural practices are what separates them. Furthermore, I observed that only men were singing and drumming, which led me to believe that it was a traditional activity exclusive to men. But I shouldn't tolerate these prejudices and preassumptions regarding men's and women's roles, cultural events that are dominated by perceptions, but instead view them as a chance to keep learning. Furthermore, if you plan to have your little ones attend these events, I advise to bring earplugs or headphones to avoid overstimulation. Now, I'll move on to making connections with course content. As I reflect on my powwow experience, I've made connections on week 8, the principles of learning. Attending this event marks the first of many steps into a cultural appreciation of Indigenous communities, as the principles of learning suggest that learning is a lengthy process due to the complexity of Indigenous communities and teachings involved. Even though I had studied Indigenous cultures in high school, I've come to the realization that it was taught passively, which contributed to my lack of understanding of the subject. At the time, I didn't have the capacity to get to really know about Indigenous culture, which spoke volumes of my values back then. As we progressed further through the course, there was a shift with how I engaged myself with the teachings as I gradually became more curious and interested. By allowing myself to take initiative of these teachings, I've grown as a learner by showing competency. At the powwow, I've seen those who participated who many would assume are not Indigenous. This relates to our discussion on prejudice and stereotypes regarding the appearance of Indigenous people and the fact that some Indigenous individuals don't fit the mold. Prior, I've had biases about how Indigenous people only look within a certain pattern with no regard of those who don't fit the mold. Knowing now how there are many people who are unaware of their Indigenous heritage, an issue that requires further attention. As an educator, these teachings help me understand to approach Indigenous children with cultural sensitivity and care. What I'll do more in the future is to set aside what I think I know of them and engage with conversations with their families, since I believe active communication is one of the best ways to learn more about a subject. In addition, I can incorporate Indigenous games into my activity planning and advocate to have guest speakers or even field trips to facilitate more exposure of these communities to children. After observing the event, I'm curious to know more on why they don't use music when dancing, as singing and drum beating is all I hear. I wonder if powwows are celebrated the same way between First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. This got me more curious about if different Indigenous communities celebrate culture within their own ways of teachings and practices. If any, I want to learn more about the unique celebrations each community has to offer to broaden my scope of practice. To achieve this, I can reach out to local Indigenous agencies for events to participate in beyond powwows. A resource I can use within practice is the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Framework. While I'm aware of this resource, I haven't given some thought about using it since I prioritize the flight framework instead. However, I need to come to accept that some children will need different methods of teachings to facilitate interactions that is more suited to their unique backgrounds and cultures. I can include some of the Indigenous games and activities we've done, such as Screaming While Running game, dot art, medicine wheels, and bone pull, with how I go about planning activities that's more inclusive to Indigenous children. What I've enjoyed about the course was that it was designed to include active learning opportunities for students to engage with Indigenous games, activities, and guest speakers, which made making connections with course content that was visible and enjoyable. As I reflect on the tragedies yet valuable lessons of Indigenous communities, it's important to be aware of the sensitivity that comes from learning about their history. I see parallels with the concept of gifting knowledge to someone in hopes to use it for its intended purpose. Same principle applies when studying about Indigenous people, to use the information to spread awareness and allyship rather than hateful speeches. As I conclude my cultural experience, I want to express my gratitude taking this course with the teachings I'll carry over into my practice as an ECE and in general. While I consider myself at the starting point in my journey towards allyship, I've experienced exceptional growth filling in the learning gaps between what I initially thought and what I've learned about Indigenous people. Furthermore, I encourage those with preconceived notions with not just Indigenous cultures, but others as well, to think, how would you feel if the positions were reversed? It starts with us with adapting to new information to minimize the ongoing unrest these people face, which I believe true allyship takes place. That concludes my journey. Thank you.